Well, the Tolkien Society finally uploaded the videos from their summer seminar. To be honest, I didn't think they would. The backlash they got over the ridiculous titles of the presentations was so bad that they didn't even live stream the presentations on YouTube like they said they would. Now that the videos are up, I'll give them a look, but I'm not going to watch them with an open mind, and that's for two reasons. One, because I'm not going to promise to entertain nonsense ideas, and that's what you mean when you say you're going to have an open mind. I will listen to the presenters and judge their points based on the strength and credibility of their arguments, but I'm not just going to assume that their arguments have merit. Two, because the Tolkien Society has such conviction over these presentations that they lock the comments and hit the like-dislike ratio. The whole point of the seminar is to foster discussion between different interpretations of Tolkien's works, so you block the comments. That pretty much tells us that they know people won't like or agree with these presentations, so they're keeping anyone from discussing them. Or so they thought, because I'm about to discuss one of them right now. I thought I'd start with the first one on their list. Gondor in Transition, a brief introduction to transgender realities in The Lord of the Rings by Cordelia Longston. And look, pronouns. Right, Cordelia is transgender, clearly presented as a woman, but wants to be called by a third-person plural pronoun. No, I already can't take you seriously if this is how you're starting out. And that's just the beginning. This is the Olympic season, so get ready for some mental gymnastics.
Tolkien's masterpiece cannot be understood through a single lens, nor was it ever meant to be. Any author drawing on as many influences as went into this text betrays one undeniable aspect of their intention. Their work is to be understood in a variety of ways, multiplied by the multitude of sources they've built it upon. Beyond that, I will attempt no conclusions about Tolkien's intent. We need to set that question aside entirely. We're always guessing at it in any case. No matter how close we are to the mark, it's still a guess.
No. We know Tolkien's intent in many cases because he told us. Many people asked him questions about his stories, and he answered plenty of those questions. You can easily find those answers online, in videos, and in publications, including in a book of his letters. Glossing over Tolkien's intent makes it sound like you're less interested in what he actually wanted to get across in his stories, and more interested in placing your interpretation as the definitive interpretation.
And even more importantly, it still doesn't matter in the face of the fact that we all have intentions with a text that are constantly shaping what we perceive in it and draw forth from it. And none of us are in a position to definitively say, for all people, for all time, what a text means.
That's not true. If a writer tells a story with a particular intention in mind, that intention remains the defining reason for the creation of that work. Others can interpret it as they will, but that doesn't change what the writer wanted to say when they created it. This sounds like revisionism, not analysis.
Even Tolkien himself drew different meanings from his many texts throughout the seasons of his life. We should allow ourselves the same luxury. We must allow it for others.
No. There's a difference between Tolkien, the creator of the story, drawing a different meaning from the work in hindsight versus you, or reader, interpreting his words to mean something they clearly don't mean. Again, this smacks of revisionism, of you trying to force the text to fit your perspective instead of understanding the intent of the text as it is.
And although I'm focusing on Gondor specifically, I do mean The Lord of the Rings as a whole, because although it is my favorite place, it is just one of many places where transgender realities are present in the text, its paratext, and its various contexts. And all of us, we begin with a context of our own. And from that vantage, then narrow our focus to the text, imbuing it with meaning in the process that expands what it means, even if only to ourselves in that moment.
Right. So you're projecting your worldview onto the text and trying to force it to conform to that view instead of looking at the text for what it is and understanding it based on what influenced it.
But we do a disservice to the nature of story and text and selves if we forget that we may also use the text we have encountered to bring its context, our context, into sharper focus.
Those are two different things, Cordelia. One's the actual content of the story, the other is you seeing what you want to see. It's like you're not actually interested in Tolkien's stories at all. You just want to talk about yourself and your experiences, and you're using something popular, like Lord of the Rings, as a way of doing that instead of, writing your own story that has the context you want.
Samwise is right. We all bring things with us into Lorien, though not all of them are peril. Surely, though, it is a peril to pretend as if we can ever wholly divorce ourselves from our own context enough to find some unspoiled and essential text. Texts, like we ourselves, are living, breathing things. And to deny this is to deny our own humanity and to dehumanize others, both greater perils than any treasure that could be gained by the pursuit of an allegedly pure reality of text or reading of it, were such a thing to exist.
I'm reminded of this line from Galaxy Quest.
Of course, it's always about you, isn't it?
We're 4 minutes into this thing, and the intro is literally all about your perspective, not the actual context of the story. How can we possibly understand something if you're projecting your perceptions onto it instead of trying to observe it for what it is?
Now, these in turn will connect us with 4 of the most cherished and defended aspects of Tolkien's work, not in contradiction of them, but in affirmation, namely his Catholicism, his use of invented language and history within his subcreation, and his obsession with the concept of eucatastrophe. For eucatastrophe itself is a sign of transgender reality, a site of conflagration between beginning and ending, the confounding of expectation, the intermingling of bitterness and hope. It is the dichotomy of beginning and ending, and the way they seamlessly flow between one another.
What? Eucatastrophe is literally the opposite of a catastrophe. Where the latter is a sudden change for the worse, the former is a sudden change for the good. There's no connection at all of that being somehow related to being transgender, because the concept of being trans is that a person is always the opposite sex despite their biology. There's no sudden change. No boy wakes up one morning and goes, "I'm a girl." Even the concept of transitioning is something that happens over time, not in an instance like a catastrophe or eucatastrophe.
Fingelas, wife of Denethor, mother to Boromir and Faramir, is an example of one, such literally present in the narrative in this passage, though discussed slightly more in the appendices. Simultaneously dispossessed of her political identity and her personal identity outside of political context. This is a transgender reality. The coexistence of political dispossession and depersonalization by political discourse.
This argument is stretched thin, like butter over too much bread. Being ostracized isn't the exclusive domain of trans people. Lots of people across every spectrum of social status, race, sex, whatever metric you want, experience being othered due to who they are. To claim anything different is to ignore reality and to ignore other people's lived experiences. The clear context of Finduilas and her status is that of a wife of the steward, and all that entails of being a woman wed to the not king. To draw anything else from that strains credulity.
You can see how these key textual descriptors of Denethor and his role within the text align nearly perfectly with Éowyn's throughout this passage. And thus we see the basis for an understanding of the stewardship itself as an office that goes beyond gendered borders and that confounds our expectations of them. This position goes beyond any one state of being present in our world to create its own unique mode of existence that at its heart opposes the notion of diametrically opposed binary, while encompassing a spectrum of identity that includes traditionally gendered traits in non-traditional ways.
Yes, the two descriptions are very similar, and I doubt that's unintentional. However, Éowyn's position is not that of a steward, but that of a queen. Theoden doesn't just leave her in charge until the right heir returns, he makes her the heir. She is to lead Rohan when he and Éomer die. This was essentially the plan anyway. She was to marry his son, thereby becoming the future queen. Since Theodred died, the marriage couldn't happen, but Theoden still passed his title to her, since she's the only other person he trusts to rule in his stead. In contrast, Denethor wants to be king. When he says the rule of Gondor is mine, he means it. He sees himself as a true ruler who's never really given his due. He's resentful of the stewardship because it places him in a middling position where he has power that can easily be taken away from him by someone who hasn't done the work he's done to keep Gondor safe. Simply put, Éowyn wants to be a warrior, not a maid or queen. Denethor wants to be king. The only thing they have in common is that they're tasked with doing something they'd rather not do, but for very different reasons. This has nothing to do with their sex beyond the nature of the task they're required to perform, and definitely wasn't Tolkien making some non-gendered claim about the nature of stewardship.
This description matches the dominant reading of Denethor in both scholarship and fandom, even as it stands in quite some opposition to the reality of Tolkien's entire body of text regarding Middle-earth. For here we see this paragraph again, only now I have annotated it by highlighting in red things which are completely false In yellow, things which are mostly false and or plausibly disputable, and in green, true, based on the additional information about the Palantiri, Denethor, the ruling stewards, and the history of Gondor that is provided in Unfinished Tales. Out of the 142 words of this paragraph that speak directly about Denethor, Gandalf is correct about 23% of the time. For Denethor, like Findulas and Gondor itself, is a location in the text where transgender realities are latent, whether or not they have been marked by the reader.
Oh dear, somebody call Tom Shippey to correct this because I haven't got the patience. Let's just take one of these red lines. He looked in the stone and was deceived. This is true, though maybe not for the reason you think. Denethor didn't have the strength to completely control the Palantir, so it was possible for Sauron to show Denethor true things that would lead Denethor to draw the wrong conclusion. That's called deception. Even if Denethor had the control to see what he wanted, his own thoughts would influence how he perceived that information, again leading him to draw the wrong conclusion. That too is called deception. It doesn't just have to be a person lying to him, he can be lying to himself, even unknowingly. But more importantly, this is Gandalf speaking, not the narrator, so it's possible that Gandalf is incorrect or misinformed as well. He's already made mistakes, specifically failing to realize what Bilbo's ring actually was. Pointing out incorrect statements by a character who makes mistakes doesn't help your argument because the character could have or give the wrong information.
To move forward in acknowledging transgender realities, we must know where to look for them. Moving toward the goal of a more widely visible set of transgender semiotics, beyond what we may think of as explicitly indicative of transgender realities, I propose the following as a starting point for further study of not only this text, but any.
Here's the thing. If these realities were there, you wouldn't have to dig this deep into Moria to find them. If you've got to do this many leaps in logic that your gymnastic skills put Olympians to shame, maybe you should consider the possibility these transgender realities aren't actually there. Maybe they're just in your head and you're projecting. And you did say we should consider all interpretations, so...
Specifically, this would include, though by no means be limited, to states of process, shifts, transitions, changes, alternatives, the confounding of dichotomies and binaries, especially those such as body and lack of body, legitimacy and illegitimacy, tradition and revolution. Death, including burials, enclosures, periods of extreme dormancy, rest, etc., seen especially as a choice, a blessing, a lesson, a transformation. Misperception, misinformation, misinterpretation and opportunities for it. Identities and alterities that are formed without bodies or bodied language. Sites of power and trauma in the body or landscape, shifting or contradictory contexts, and rejection of expected context in part or entirely.
With respect, what in the blue hell are you even talking about? Honestly, read your list again. You're just citing random shit and claiming it's related to being trans, even when it obviously isn't, like being dead. This is you just pulling at straws to try to make Lord of the Rings something it's not. It's not a commentary about being transgender at all, and trying to interpret it as that is just intellectually dishonest. No, you know what? Let me be blunt. It's lying. You're lying about Tolkien and his intentions and his story, and it makes zero sense to do this. The man already invited you to apply the story to aspects of your life. Instead of just doing that, you're doing the very thing he disliked, trying to turn his story into an allegory, and you're failing at it because it's such a stretch you can't even build a foundation on which to make this ridiculous argument.
The presumption of deconstruction in the hands of whiteness, of straightness, maleness, cisgenderedness, suggests that those states of being, those modes of knowing and interacting with the world, of existing, are somehow more inherent, vital, whole and wholesome, and in need of defending from falling apart, or more accurately, from falling apart in the hands of those who just simply don't understand. But there are many things in this world that need to be torn down. That they exist is not a testament to the fact of their primacy, but simply that those with power have been shaping the world and her narratives for their own ends for too long.
Or, everything isn't about you and your lived experiences. The Lord of the Rings is a story about a bunch of straight white dudes. It's not about them being straight, white, or male, but simply focuses on them and their experiences. I'm not entirely sure why this is a problem for you, but it clearly is, and maybe that's something you need to examine, because Tolkien's story is partially a reflection of his lived experiences in war, and your attempt to revise and deconstruct his experiences is essentially an attack on the straight white male experience. That's racist, sexist, and heterophobic. It comes across as someone trying to silence them by destroying the text they can relate to that reflects their experiences. Why would you want to tear down the experiences of these men? Why should their experiences matter less? Why should yours matter more? In this situation, it's more bizarre because we all know Tolkien's influences, so to take this anti-male approach with the text that is at its core about men's friendships and bonds makes no sense. This is like attacking the Bible for being religious. You do know what it is, right?
There has been a blindness at the heart of learning, of higher education, of scholarship, of this fandom. And we continue that blindness if we choose to see the expansion of bringing forth from texts, from discourse, what was always there, but we were too blinded to see. We owe it to those who knew before us. We owe it to those who have fallen and are falling beneath the juggernaut of broken systems, those we've inherited, those our ancestors built. We owe it to the earth and her creatures. How dare we call deconstruction in fear what is an excavation, an unearthing?
Out of your ass? Yes. Out of the actual text? No. Tolkien didn't write about being transgender. That's obvious because the concept didn't even exist when he wrote his stories, and if he wanted to play on the idea of people changing their sex, he had all the opportunity to do it because this was pure fantasy. So he could have easily used something like Loki turning Thor into a woman in one of his stories. That he didn't do that in any of his writings is a good indication that even if transgenderism were a thing he thought about, he didn't put it into his works, probably because it wasn't the story he wanted to tell. Like I said at the beginning, this smacks of revisionism and someone trying to make everything about them instead of looking at the text for what it is.
The presumption of naming non-dominant analyses solely or dismissively as reader response is perhaps even more cowardly. Not one of us is qualified to determine any one true reading, and believing such a thing exists seems to me to automatically disqualify one from suitability for such a task in the first place.
Wouldn't that disqualify you since you think the cisgender heterosexual white male interpretation is invalid and needs to be dismantled? All y'all should be wary of people who use this kind of doublespeak. The moment someone says, "No one is an authority except for me," don't trust that person. That's a person looking for power and control, and they'll only get it if you give it to them. Don't entertain that bullshit. Instead, ask this basic question. If no one is an authority, what makes you think you get to decide what views are valid, which ones need to be deconstructed, and which ones are hidden in the pages?
For why should we trust an inclination to hide away from the other, to allow humble curiosity to be vilified, to see as most human only those aspects of humanity which most closely resemble our own? When we, with necessary force and purpose, make room for long unheard voices to finally be heard, for long unseen faces to finally be seen, it is not a harm to those who have been heard, who have been seen.
Like I said before, everything isn't about you. The story of Lord of the Rings was built around the interests and experience of J.R.R. Tolkien, a straight white man. The story intentionally reflects on his experiences in life and war. You don't have to like it, but you do have to accept it because it's the truth. Deal with it. You don't get to change the man's story or his intentions because you're salty about being transgender. There's no bisexual characters in the story, no black characters, no atheists that we know of, no Americans, and I'm not losing my mind. I've never once felt the need to be seen or heard in the context of Middle-earth because my life is not what the Middle-earth stories are about. If you're catching clapback, that's why. You're not letting the story be what it is. You're trying to force it to be what you want it to be, and then trying to make everyone else agree with you, and that's just not how this works. You can see whatever you want to see, but the rest of us don't have to agree with you. And if you find people are disagreeing with you more than they're agreeing with you, you might want to consider why. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.